Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Folks, we've got an interesting show today, and I say interesting from a very specific point of view. Stephen Bloom, who's the CEO of Miller Ingenuity, is running a company that's over 75 years old, and it's a company that is primarily focused. And I say primarily focused because there's a lot of expansion to this primarily focused epithet that I'm putting in place here in the railroad industry. And railroads have been around since the literally early 1700s, thereabouts. They've been around a long time. So what Miller Ingenuity is known for right now, they are internationally recognized for the work that they do in high technology products that save lives and preserves the environment. Now, that's an interesting mix in an industry as old as railroads. And Stephen is also kind of unique in the fact that not only does he lead the organization, but he's also a recognized expert on leading change in business transformation. And it's the business transformation piece that I was very interested in and why I wanted to have him on the show. So Stephen, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Blaine. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's just kind of jump into this with both feet. Talking about railroads, when I'm talking about the soul of business for something that's been around as long as railroads, and I'm going to just be generic with that. What comes to mind for you? Because, again, Miller Ingenuity, 75 years old, you are relevant. And that would be one word that I would want to key on. In your space, and more than just in your space, the industry, you lead an aspect of that industry in a way that is really, really kind of unique. So what does the soul of business evoke for you? And why would a leader want to pay attention to it?
Let me start out with, there are a lot of soulless businesses out there today.
Yes.
And if you want to motivate and engage your employees, there has to be a reason why they would want to be motivated and engaged. And people who are working for a soulless business, they don't have anything to get engaged about. And when I think about the soul of a business, I think of, Blaine, the very essence of what drives it forward, what its foundational values are, and why it exists the way that it does, and why should it continue to exist tomorrow. And if there is no soul in the business, there is no, people can leave whenever they want. People can, you hear the latest catchphrase, what is it called? Quiet quitting now.
Quiet quitting.
And I love quiet quitting because that's nothing new. It's been around a long time, but until the media named it, now it's kind of a big thing.
Yep. Well,
so I think of the soul of it. People won't leave a company that has a soul. They will leave a company that is soulless because it's just, you're punching a ticket. I'm not that engaged, and I'll leave when I feel like it. So I think the soul is very integral to have a successful business.
Gallup has done this survey for 20 plus years that I'm aware of, looking at employee engagement, and that number has not moved. And the regular listeners to the show have heard me cite this statistic more than once. But roughly speaking, 87% of global workforce is disengaged from the work they're doing in a meaningful way. They're disengaged meaningfully. The quiet quitting piece. They're showing up, punching the clock, but they're not really there. You said something just a moment ago that I really had not thought of in the way that you positioned it. Why should we exist tomorrow? I know why we exist today, but this goes to the question of relevance and actually how do I leverage my soul and my organization's soul? Why should we exist tomorrow? And one of the things that one of your last books, Metamorphosis from Rust Belt to High Technology in the 21st Century World, one of the things that you talk about has to do with what happened during the pandemic. That 3-year gap here, 19 to 22, where we are today, wiped out thousands of businesses. And in the publicity bio that I got for you preparatory to getting ready for this, one of the things it says here, the fault doesn't lie with the pandemic. It lies with the businesses that were not strong enough to survive the adversity of the pandemic.
Yep.
It also lies with the CEO and the senior leadership who failed basically their job.
Yeah.
So what are you talking about there? Because by the way, I happen to agree with you completely. And I think it speaks directly to this question of why should it exist tomorrow?
Well, you can name a lot of industries and a lot of businesses that were dying before the pandemic. They just didn't know it, or they didn't recognize it. I was just a friend of mine was talking to me this morning about one of the foundational malls not far from here. That's a ghost town now. Well, foundational malls have been dying for years and years and years and years. They either didn't recognize it or didn't choose to deal with it. And so the pandemic just sort of speeded them to the grave. And when I look at what companies that went into the pandemic that had strong balance sheets, they all came out on the other side with strong balance sheets. Mine happened to be one of them. We had a strong balance sheet to begin with. And then you look at the companies that didn't survive that. Now, I can't know this for certain, of course, but my suspicion is every company that did not survive the pandemic, I don't care what it was, hospitality was a little harder than manufacturing in most cases to survive. The ones that didn't have a strong balance sheet just didn't survive. And the lesson that I teach CEOs is, the next pandemic may not be a medical pandemic. It may be a competitor that makes a move you didn't contemplate. If we've learned anything during the pandemic, Blaine, it's the government can do any damn thing they want anytime they want. And so the government can decide to overregulate your industry. The government can decide to overtax your industry. The government can just decide to shut your industry down. And so I tell CEOs all the time, you really have to be prepared for it. You have to assume there's another crisis coming and you have to prepare for it. The way to prepare for it, primarily in short, is to have a strong balance sheet.
Yeah. So that kind of leads to another question here. Steps that can be taken to not only avoid impending disaster, but to grow and prosper. I mean, stuff is going to happen out there. That's out of my control. Pandemic is out of my control. Government action out of my control.
Most things are.
What's in my control? What's in my control?
Right.
As an entrepreneur, let alone a CEO of a larger enterprise organization.
Well, I was leading a CEO mind group a number of years ago, and one of my members said, at some point in time, we have to talk about the government. I said, no, we're not going to talk about the government in this forum because we can't do anything about the government effectively. We can't, influence that in one way or another. So let's talk about, to your point, let's talk about things that we can't control. And the primary thing that people leading organizations, this is one of the tenets of why you should exist tomorrow. You have to look at tomorrow. I shouldn't say most CEOs, a lot of CEOs only look at what's happening today. Okay, things are good today. Margins are okay today. Yeah, a little competition out there. I sort of don't like that, but it's all right, And they assume that tomorrow is going to be just like today. Tomorrow is not going to be just like today in anybody's book. And you have to, like Wayne Gretzky used to say, he always skates to where the puck is going to be. He doesn't, and that's what a CEO has to do. And my company's been around for 75 years. I've been leading it the last 25 of it. We've been through pandemics, recessions, depressions in the 50s. And the reason that we're still alive and still thriving is because we're always looking ahead to what has to be done. Case in point, we're now into the safety space. Safety and preservation of natural resources space. Right. In addition to, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so I still have my core products that generate margins while my emerging products are emerging. And when I entered the safety space a number of years ago, it was very expensive and very, very complicated. And my board looked at me and said, why would you want to spend all this money on that? When we got good margins, we got good products. I said, look, I can tell you, when you look at the growth curve of our current products, they only go one place. Yeah, because the industry doesn't get bigger. The rail industry does not get bigger. So the growth of our products can only go down. So we have to plan for the future. As painful and as controversial as that can be. And I would say one thing to CEOs, it's going to be painful and it's going to be controversial. So you have to strap in there, put on your flak vest, and get ready for that, because to convince all your constituents to make those kind of moves, you got to be part cheerleader, part salesman, and part bully. So you have to be ready for all of those. But that's the way to, that answers the question of why should I exist tomorrow? Because identify an area of need, of great need, and I could talk about the safety aspect in a minute, and then you move toward that need. If there is no need out there, you don't have any reason to exist.
Exactly.
And eventually that catches up to you.
Yeah, Marshall Goldsmith, his aphorism of what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Same thing.
Yeah, this is same. So the idea of, I mean, this whole notion of the CEO, a lot of the CEOs that I coach and work with see themselves as operators. And again, I'm talking here specifically, mid-sized companies, or smaller companies, actually, $20 million revenue cap, that sort of a thing here, which it's not surprising. They kind of grew up with the business, and so they've got their hands and their fingers into a lot of things here. One of the things that I'm hearing embedded in what you're speaking to, Steve, is being able to get my head up,
right?
Yeah, looking out on the horizon.
Yep.
What's emerging out there, that my board may not be aware of, that certainly my people may not be aware of, because they're in the trenches doing the do, and that sort of thing. Is there anything that you've noticed in your own experience as CEO that has lent itself to your ability to actually get your head up? What did you have to learn in order to do that?
Well, I've had a lot of bad experiences in my career. A few good ones.
That's a good teacher.
A few good ones, or we wouldn't be talking. And I learned from a lot of the guys I used to work for that made the mistake you just talked about. They're deep into the operation. They don't belong deep into the operation. And I saw the failure of that because they couldn't see what was right in front of their faces. And I have a good friend of mine. I have a joint venture in Brazil, and he's the CEO of the joint venture, and he is all over his operation. He's, into the manufacturing, he's into the development. And I keep telling him all the time, you got to get out. You don't belong there. And when you're doing there, you can't, to your point, get your head up and see what's ahead of you. So that's one reason why I have the ability to see ahead. The other is I hate detail. I'm just not really good at detail. And I know it, right? I just hate detail. You give me something to read, Blaine, and I'll skim through it in about 13 seconds. I don't care. And I get bored easily, right? And so I make sure that I shore up that weakness by people who work for me, who are into the detail. Give an example. My senior leadership team, I don't get into their areas. I have no idea what they're doing. I don't want to know what they're doing. And I meet with them about once a month, and we take a 30,000-foot view of the business. Okay, I do a deep dive once a month. What are the margins like? What are the threats like? What are this like? And then I get out of it and I let those guys do their thing. And if they're not able to do their thing, you get the wrong guys. And I think that's really essential. You have to, I guess it helps that I'm bored with detail. I just am. I'm not good at that, but I'm smart enough to know I got to have people who work for me who are good at that.
Yeah. Partly of what you're beginning to speak to, or at least referencing here, has to do with attitude, kind of a leadership attitude. In your experience, what are some of the, in addition to what we've just been looking at, attitudes that can, and universally, doom a company? Leadership attitude.
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of them.
Yes, I know. And
I'm sure
you've been in the trenches for 25 years here.
Yeah. So you know what they are. Throughout my 40-year career, I was in every part of an organization. I was in all of it. Lower levels, middle levels, senior levels, manufacturing, marketing, sales. So I've been around enough organizations, as I expect you have. So I can see this coming a mile away. I tell CEOs all the time, you don't have a problem that I haven't seen before. As a matter of fact, you don't have a problem that I haven't already solved before. And one of the attitudes that I find most prevalent with the people that I talk to is it's not an attitude of deep belief and engagement and excitement for the future of the company. I mean, you got to live, eat, and breathe if you're going to be a CEO. I know you do too. I think about this. If I'm not thinking about this company or sitting in a meeting about this company, it's 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. I'm looking at emails because we do business all over the world.
Mhm.
And I eat, sleep, and breathe this company. And those that don't, because CEOs can be clock punchers too. Those
Yes.
that don't, that's the worst kind of attitude. And what really irks me, Blaine, is they're failing everybody, not only their shareholders, but their employees, people who the entire organization depends on the CEO to do the right thing. Now, will the CEO do the right thing all the time? No, nobody could. But if you got a CEO is sort of like there just because he's there, that's probably the worst kind of attitude a company can have.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, it trickles down. There's no
Yeah.
question about that. So if we're
Yeah.
looking at engagement,
People
going
see
back
that.
all the way back to Gallup,
Yeah.
then assuming that there's nobody out there but me, and my external world is a reflection of my internal world. I mean, it's manifested out there. So
Yeah.
those of you that are listening, if you're wrestling with employee engagement, an invitation would be to look at where are you not engaged?
Yeah.
What it is that the organization's up to. What are you?
You look at those Gallup polls, they haven't changed at all. They're the same.
No,
In 20 years, they haven't changed.
20 years, they haven't moved.
No, and now it's a phenomenon. The other poll that Harvard did a study once, this is about 20 or 25 years ago, on why aren't people engaged? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Number one reason that people weren't engaged is because they didn't feel respected. And they ranked, they said, tell me what's most important to you, respect or money? Money was way down here. Respect was number one. And how inexpensive is it to give people respect?
Yeah, it costs nothing.
No, it costs nothing. But I'll tell you what, I don't want to digress too much on this point, but respect is so important that it's not enough for the leadership to have respect of their employees. That's a given. That's table stakes. Everybody has to have respect for everybody else. And if they don't, because when people disrespect each other, how can they function effectively as a team?
Yeah.
So the CEO has to insist, and you can't just give it lip service. If people aren't, I had an organization once, I started firing people because of the disrespect they displayed with each other. I gave them warning. I told them, and it's not the kind of thing that CEO can just say, you have to have it. He has to put some teeth in that. Otherwise, people just think it's another edict on high. It'll go away if they ignore it.
Yeah. Artwork on the wall. We respect,
right.
we respect our people. And then, I see this, I do a lot of work in the hospital space, in the healthcare space, and, being in the OR, and I'll see surgeons just, reaming a charge nurse or, and it's kind of like, what's going on here? This is not acceptable behavior.
No, absolutely not. No, it's horrible. That's horrible.
So we're going to take a real quick break here. When we come back, there's something that I want to go into a little bit more granular discussion around, and it has to do with silent business killers, something that you've written about, talk about. And I think it's going to be relevant to what we're looking at in terms of why should we exist tomorrow? I'm going to give you a little bit of time here to kind of chew on that. So when we come back, we'll explore that a little bit.
All right.
But in case folks, we're listening to Steve Blue here. We're going to take a real quick break. The idea of relevance is what we're looking at here, and we want to explore. So what keeps you relevant? What keeps you relevant as the world around you collapses around your ears? Okay. We'll be right back. I want to thank you for listening. I want to also invite you right now to go to blainebartlett.com. And on that site, which is my personal website, you'll see services up on the top menu. I'd like you to click on Leadership Mastermind. Now, why I want you to do that is we have structured a mastermind program that is very unusual and it is very powerful. And by going onto that site and clicking that link, you'll be taken to a landing page that is an invitation to join this mastermind. It's a 52-week-long exploration of what it takes to be a highly effective leader in today's fast-changing environment. You won't regret it. And if you've been liking what you've been listening to on these Soul of Business podcasts,
How does one become a leader that can keep connection to the soul of business? That's what we look at. That's what we're about in this mastermind program. So again, go to blainebartlett.com and click on the services link. And there you'll find the link to the Leadership Mastermind program. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for listening to this little commercial. And now back to our show.
Welcome back. Before Steve and I took a break, I had put up on the table a possibility for us to have a conversation around something that he calls the six silent business killers. And I'm interested in having a little conversation around this because when we look at the world today, we've got economic uncertainty, we've got inflation going on, we've got political, things in crisis, things are collapsing around our ears and all this sort of stuff, all of which are out of our control. And we still have to run a viable business. We have to keep things moving. And part of this has to do with why should we exist tomorrow? If the world around us is collapsing today, why should we exist tomorrow? So, Steve, I'd be interested. You speak about this in the talks that you give, and you speak to some pretty prestigious organizations. I mean, you've been around the block for a while here.
I have.
CNN, CNBC, Forbes, Fortune, the Wall Street Journal. What are some of the business killers, six silent business killers that can sneak up on us, kind of like carbon monoxide that you start dozing off and the next thing you know, you're not here.
Yeah, I just did a keynote at Carnegie Hall in June of this year. And I was just in California a couple of weeks ago to get an award from, it's called an XP Award from the National Academy of Expert Speakers and Authors. And that's one of the issues that I talked about was the silent business killers. When you say, God, we got economic uncertainty, we've got political uncertainty, we've got physical insecurity. Well, dial back 20 years, we had that then. Now, maybe some of it wasn't quite as bad. Maybe it was, but still, dial back 40 years, they had that then. So, to your point, that's noise level that you have to ignore as a CEO. What kills businesses, and what I wrote about, I think it was in my first book, Silent Business Killers. The worst one is when a CEO looks at his numbers and they've deteriorated a little bit, ever so slightly. They've gotten a little soft, okay? And he concludes, because usually the sales guy will tell him, boss, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Next month the numbers will be better. That's the worst. That's an insidious killer when your numbers start to get soft. Well, I'll give you an example. I look at order entry every single day. Now that seems contradictory to a guy who doesn't pay attention to the details, but that's the lifeblood of the business. And every now and again, the system doesn't deliver me the order report when it's supposed to. And then I'm all over that. I'm sending out emails to my sales guy. Where the hell is my orders report? And so that's my early warning system. I know if that gets soft about 3 days in a row, that's all it takes in our business and with our backlog, 3 or 4 days in a row, I know something's up. Then I start asking questions. But when CEOs don't pay great attention to the orders, and the CEOs assume a softening is going to sort itself out later on, that is probably the biggest silent business killer I see. Because when it becomes completely apparent that it's life-threatening, it's too late to do anything about it.
Yeah, I want to just kind of hold on that point here, because I think it's something that a lot of people don't pay attention to. In some of the training work I do, and particularly in the consulting work I do, one of the questions I'll bring to the table is, what do you think your economic engine runs on? And that question is different than how do you make money?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, order entry is the metric by, that's the, your business runs on order entry. I mean, if that thing starts to fall aside, how many of you listening do not know what your economic engine is? How many of you have not really identified what that is? Because when it starts to wane and you notice that something's off, if you don't know where to look, you're not going to know what to fix.
Right.
is essentially what's going on here.
Yeah. And I'll give you another example of that. Speaking of healthcare, I'm on the board of a healthcare system, and I've been on that board for a long time, 15 maybe, and that's a whole nother wild. I'm glad I'm not the CEO of healthcare.
Oh, healthcare space. Wow.
Oh, it's horrible. It's wonderful and it's horrible. Anyway, right before the pandemic, we were all having a strategy meeting, the board, right? And we had docs in there, and board members and all that kind of stuff. And one doc said, it was a general surgeon. He said, well, he asked, what's the most profitable thing we do here? Nobody could answer that. I'm not sure he knew the answer to that, but nobody, okay, fine, that's bad. Not horrible, but bad. And then he said, the obvious answer is elective general surgery. In our case, it was a small system of the scopes, mostly colonoscopies and all that kind of thing. He said, what would happen if something happened and we couldn't do colonoscopies for 6 months? And everybody said, including me, I was guilty too. We all said, well, that's not going to happen. What the hell? 3 months later, poof. As you know, no elective surgeries, no colonoscopies for the longest time. And so you have, as a CEO, you have to have a plan for the worst case. That's one of the other silent business killers, is you have to have an emergency readiness plan to go right now. In a crisis, you don't have time to start figuring things out. You're under pressure. You make bad judgments. So you just have to have a fail-safe plan for what's the worst thing that can happen to us. Let's come on, guys. What's the worst thing that can happen? Well, okay, my biggest customer suddenly stops all orders. Okay, can that happen? Of course it can. And how long can we survive if it happens, and what will we do about it? And then when you get a smaller episode of something like that, it's like, okay, fine, we know exactly what we're going to do. I'll give you a perfect example. We're staring down the barrel of a rail strike. And that would be bad, right? Well, okay, history would say if they have it, it might last a weekend. That'll be about it. Congress will intervene. I don't know. And so I asked my team, I said, what happens to us for every day there is a rail strike? What happens to our top line? What happens to our bottom line? What happens to our overhead structure and all that kind of stuff? So I know, so I don't panic. When that happens, I don't go, oh, now what am I going to do? I know, and I've noticed my board, here's what's going to happen. And in my case, really, it's a deferral of income. It's not a loss of income, because what they buy from me, they're going to buy. They just may not buy it for a while. So I know exactly what's going to happen, and I can plan for it. And then if it happens, I could tell my people, calm down, because they're looking at the news. They're worried about, are they going to get laid off and all that kind of stuff? Just calm down. So I think that's probably the second most insidious silent business killer, because things happen and no one prepares for it.
Yeah.
Then they don't know what to do.
Yeah, I'm reminded of scenario planning. Royal Dutch Shell was, I think, one of the only big oil firms that did the kind of scenario planning that actually predicted the fall of the Soviet Union.
Really?
And
wow.
they had a scenario in place to handle the disruption to the oil flow as a consequence of what was going on around.
I'll be darned. You don't see much of that.
No, particularly in an enterprise level.
Right. Wow.
And they were able to. I mean, you talk about pivoting. Pivot is about a plan B, and having
exactly right.
Yeah.
If you have to develop a plan B in a crisis, it's too late. I mean, you just can't do it. I mean, you have to. You feel like you have to. Your board will be breathing down your neck. What are you doing? What are you doing? Why aren't you doing it faster? And you really have to. You have to be able to push the board back a little bit sometimes. Say, hold on a minute, guys. I know you're out there and you're 3 steps removed, so I know you're concerned, but let's just not overreact. Why don't you just let me handle it?
Well, you bring the board up, and you've mentioned the board a couple of times. One of the other things that I have run into, just in my own business, but also in the consulting work that I do with leaders around the world, is the CEO board relationship. Whose board is it? What is the role of the board? Is it strategic, or where's that operational gray line? I mean, all of that sort of stuff comes in. In your experience, what is the recipe, if you could, for a successful collaboration between the executive and the board?
Yeah, in a public company, the board's role is pretty clearly defined in most public companies. I mean, they're not operational, it's strategic, and the only decisions you get to make is you approve an annual budget, you approve a strategy, and you hire or fire the CEO. That's your role.
it.
And so if you don't like what I'm doing as a CEO, you got two choices. In private companies, which would be mostly what you deal with, and me too, is it's whatever the board decides it is, whatever the shareholders decide that the board's role is. Now, boards can be very individual board members can be really effective depending on what they've come from, but a lot of them aren't necessarily business people. They got the board role because of the family ownership, right?
Right.
And so you cannot ever let a board especially in a private company get their fingers down into the operation, because they don't know what they're doing generally.
Yeah.
Some might not. And I guarantee you, if you let them put the fingers in the operation and they screw it up, they're not going to blame themselves. They're going to blame you.
That is so true.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what I'm talking about. You've been around just like I have. So what I did early on in my relationship 25 years ago with the board was I absolutely insisted that they not do that. And it was at somewhat personal peril at the beginning, because they're saying, you don't understand, kid. We hired you, you work for us. We'll tell you what we're going to. I said, no, you're not gonna. And then over the years, because things were working out pretty successfully and our numbers quadrupled, our operating income numbers quadrupled, they began to believe that I sort of knew what I was talking about. And so what I have a sense now, Blaine, for what they need to know and what they don't need to know. And over the years, I've sort of conditioned them to what they can expect from me. And we've even had discussions about that. Guys, here's what I won't do. I won't buy a company. Oh, and and then I said, we need what is it called? Limits of authority document.
Limits of authority. Yep.
For the CEO. Simple enough. They never did get around to it, even though I asked them here. So, basically I can't buy a company. I can't sell a company. I can't divest of a significant asset. I can't do this, but other than that, I can do anything else that's in it. So you have to develop trust based on results. Nothing gains trust better than results. And then you have to really clearly define, so we don't argue later on about what I could have done or what I should not have done.
Yeah, perfect. Where can people find out more about what you're up to? And I'm not talking necessarily about the company, but you are a resource that I think is very rich, and any budding entrepreneur, any seasoned entrepreneur would benefit greatly from getting more access to not only if and when appropriate, but mostly what it is that you bring to the table. Where can people find out more about you?
I think the easiest way, Blaine, is StephenLBlue.com, STEVENLBLUE.com. There's links to Miller Ingenuity, my company, and so they can find anything they want to know about me or Miller Ingenuity from that site.
Perfect. Folks, we've been listening, obviously, to Stephen Blue. And the idea here of, and I want to come back to this because as we wrap this thing up here, why should we exist tomorrow? I think that is a relevant question because it does speak to relevance. And I don't mean to be facile around that or flippant. But if you're not relevant, you're not going to have people engaged emotionally with what it is that you're doing, either as an employee or as a customer. And keeping your eye on the ball doesn't mean keeping the eye on the ball where it is today.
Right.
Euphemistically, Wayne Gretzky, go to where the puck's going to be. Why should we exist tomorrow? I want to thank you, Steve. It's been a great conversation, and
my pleasure.
Look forward to learning more about what you're up to.
Well, thank you so much.
You've been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host again, Blaine Bartlett. Find out more about what I'm up to at blainebartlett.com. And as always, find yourself a way to be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. You'll find that your life works a whole lot better that way. Take care.